My name is Evaden Mercer. I am 71 years old, a retired school secretary, and for most of my life, people have described me as steady, organized, reliable, the sort of woman who keeps careful lists and remembers birthdays. I take pride in that steadiness. It has carried me through widowhood, through years of raising my daughter alone, through the quiet routines that now make up my days. That Tuesday afternoon in Asheville began like any other. The sun slanted through the lace curtains, turning the folded stacks of laundry on my bed into soft little towers of color. I was humming along with the radio, sorting towels from blouses, when the front door banged open so hard the frame rattled. I froze, clutching a dishcloth in my hands. Heavy steps crossed the hall. My daughter's voice sharp, furious, cut through the house. "Mom, you changed the password. I can't use your card anymore." Kara came into the bedroom with her face flushed, her eyes bright with anger I'd never seen aimed at me before. She was 43, still tall and beautiful in the way her father once was. But in that moment, she looked like a stranger. I set the dishcloth down carefully, as if precision might cool the air. "Yes, Kara, I changed it. It's my card." Her mouth twisted. "You embarrassed me. I was at the store." "Mom," standing there with groceries. "And the transaction failed." Do you know how that felt? Everyone staring while I tried to explain. "I told you we needed that account." The words landed like blows. Embarrassed her. For using my money, I had lived through years of double shifts, through eating soup and bread so she could have her violin lessons. And now I was being accused of betrayal in my own house. I opened my mouth to answer, but stopped. Something in her eyes hard, unyielding, made my chest tighten. For the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of fear when looking at my own child. Kara turned away, pacing across the rug. "You don't just change things without telling me. We're family. We depend on you." I steadied myself on the edge of the bed, the clean laundry beside me already forgotten. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't about a password. It was about control. And as she stood there demanding what was mine, I realized I would have to decide how far I was willing to be pushed. Kara followed me into the living room, her steps sharp against the hardwood. My hands were trembling, but not from age. I had anticipated this storm for weeks, and I had prepared. On the coffee table sat a neat folder, the kind I once used to organize student files. I pulled it closer and opened it with deliberate calm. "Sit down," I said softly. My voice didn't rise, but it carried enough weight that she obeyed, lowering herself onto the sofa with her arms crossed. I spread the papers across the table, columns of dates, vendors, and amounts that left no room for imagination. My finger landed on one line. $200, cosmetics. Another page. 500 at La Belle, that restaurant on Biltmore Avenue. I slid the last sheet toward her. 700 at a boutique, dresses I don't own. Kara glanced down, then back up at me with a dismissive laugh. "Those were for the house? Mom? For us? Food, clothing, things we all need? You're making it sound worse than it is." Her tone was practiced, light as if she were soothing a child's tantrum. For a second, I almost believed her. Hadn't she once stood in this very room, holding her newborn son, promising me that family would always come first? The memory pressed hard against my chest, but the numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable. "La Belle is not a necessity," I said, my voice firmer now. "Neither is designer clothing." She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You've always helped us. Why start keeping score now? We're family. Families share. Don't twist it into something ugly." Her words slipped under my skin like splinters. I swallowed against the ache in my throat, feeling that old pull to keep the peace, to let her win just so the shouting would stop. Yet as I gathered the papers back into the folder, a heavy thought settled over me. Maybe this wasn't about groceries, or emergencies, or even family. Maybe it was about control, hers tightening, mine slipping, that night. After Kara slammed the door behind her, I sat alone with the folder on my lap. The numbers blurred, but not from poor eyesight. They bled into memories, each figure a thread tugging me backward in time. I was 46 when Robert died. One winter morning, he kissed my cheek, went to work, and never came home again. A heart attack at his desk. Sudden and merciless, I remember standing at the graveside with Kara pressed against my coat, her tears soaking the wool, and thinking it's just the two of us now. From then on, every choice was survival. I took the secretary job at the high school during the day and cleaned offices at night. I learned to function on 5 hours of sleep and instant coffee. Vacations disappeared. The beach trips we used to dream about became afternoons in the public park with peanut butter sandwiches. I told Kara it was just as fun, and she believed me for a while. When tuition bills arrived years later, I had nothing but determination to offer. I sold the sapphire ring Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary. Then the gold bracelet his mother had left me. One by one, the keepsakes of my marriage were traded for semesters of books and fees. Kara never knew. She only saw the checks clear, the dorm room furnished, the tuition paid on time. Through it all, I kept telling myself this was what mothers did give until there was nothing left to give, and I never once stopped to draw a line. To say this is enough. This part is mine, now. Staring at those receipts, I realized generosity had turned into a kind of silence. One I had mistaken for love. I had trained my daughter to expect open hands, never locked drawers. I had thought it would bind us together. Instead, it might have taught her that my boundaries were hers to erase. Kara returned 2 days later, her tone sugar-sweet, as though the shouting had never happened. She brought a bag of pastries from the cafe downtown and set them on my kitchen counter. "I thought you'd like a treat," she said, sliding into a chair with the kind of brightness that always made me brace myself. We sipped coffee in a silence that felt staged. Then she leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Mom, you've been forgetting things lately. Little things. Maybe it's time to think about letting someone else help manage your finances." The words hung in the air like smoke. I set my cup down carefully. "Forgetting things." She nodded solemnly. "The card password, the bills. You've been confused about charges we already talked through. Camilla even said you got mixed up at the grocery store last month." I felt the heat rising in my chest. That grocery trip had been ordinary bread, eggs, and milk. But Kara's certainty pressed against my memory like a wedge. She spoke so smoothly, so reasonably. I almost questioned myself. I forced a smile. "I may be older, but I am not confused. I know what's mine." Her lips tightened. "Mom, I'm only worried about you. Everyone knows how generous you are. I just don't want people taking advantage because you're not as sharp as you used to be." Later that week, Mrs. Duncan from across the street paused while walking her dog. "I heard you had some trouble with your bank card. Evadny. Must be stressful keeping track of all that at our age." She smiled kindly, but there was a flicker in her eyes that told me Kara had been talking. The gossip spread in whispers, neighbors asking if I was doing all right, if I needed help with errands. Each well-meaning question landed like a pebble dropped into a jar, filling me with dread. Kara wasn't just after my money. She was rewriting my reputation, turning my steadiness into fragility. I locked the door that evening and sat in my chair until the shadows lengthened, clutching the folder of statements. Losing money was one kind of wound. Losing the truth of who I was capable, careful, in control felt like something far crueler. That weekend, when the neighborhood settled into its usual hum of lawnmowers and porch talk, I shut myself inside. I drew the curtains, powered up the printer, and stacked reams of paper on the dining table. If Kara was going to rewrite my story, I would anchor myself to the only language that never lies: numbers. Statement after statement slid from the printer's tray, each page heavy with transactions I didn't remember authorizing. I spread them out in careful rows, like evidence in a trial, with a yellow highlighter. I drew lines through the familiar, the utilities, the grocery store, the pharmacy. Then I circled the strangers' boutiques I'd never entered. Restaurants that served food I couldn't afford. Spa services that mocked the ache in my hands. I opened a notebook and began copying it all down date. Place, amount. Years in the school office had taught me the discipline of logs, the comfort of order. My handwriting was steady, even as my pulse raced. Then came the detail that stopped me cold. A string of ATM withdrawals, each at 3 a.m, 6 in the last 3 months. My chest tightened as I looked toward the bedroom door, knowing exactly where I had been. At those hours sleeping under a quilt my mother had sewn, never once leaving the house. The truth rose like bile. My card had been used while I slept, which meant someone had a copy. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the small fireproof box where I kept documents: birth certificate, Robert's death papers, the deed to the house. Nothing looked disturbed, but the knowledge gnawed at me. Kara, or someone close to her, had handled my information. They hadn't just borrowed, they had taken. I sat back, the notebook open before me, numbers scrawled in long, accusing columns. The house was silent, except for the tick of the clock, each second reminding me that this wasn't confusion, wasn't age, wasn't paranoia. This was betrayal, measured down to the penny. Long before Kara stormed into my house demanding passwords, I had already felt the first tug of unease. It was last autumn, when my bank called about a suspicious online purchase for electronics I hadn't ordered. The charge was reversed, but the fear lingered. That week, I met with Misbah Patel, the banker I've trusted for nearly 15 years. She wore her usual navy blazer and listened with the calm patience I had always admired. "Mrs. Mercer," she said gently, "fraud against seniors is more common than most realize. One precaution is to set up a living trust and move your assets where they're harder to touch. You'd keep control, but others couldn't access them without your consent." I had nodded, my palms sweating against the desk. It felt dramatic, but something in her tone, firm, protective, told me it wasn't paranoia. So, I followed her advice. I created a separate account that sent alerts for every transaction. I moved my savings there. Every dollar I had earned through decades of late nights and careful budgeting, with her help. I also placed the deed to my house in the trust's name. On paper, it no longer belonged to me alone, but to a structure Kara couldn't tamper with. I didn't tell anyone. Not Kara. Not the neighbors. Not even my sister, who calls every Christmas. It was my quiet insurance, tucked behind a locked drawer. Now, as I looked over the notebook filled with evidence, I felt a shiver of strange relief. The money they thought they were draining was already shielded. The house Kara once assumed would pass to her without question no longer lay within her reach. She could rage at me for changing a password, but the truth was far larger. Kara was fighting over an account that no longer held the future she imagined. The fortress had already been built brick by careful brick long before she realized there was even a war. The following Monday, I walked into a brick building downtown. Its sign weathered but dignified Hollis and Crane, attorneys at law. My neighbor Alma had whispered the recommendation, saying Mr. Hollis was the kind of man who listened first and billed later. That was enough for me. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. Mr. Hollis rose from behind his desk. A tall man with gray hair that curled at his collar and a pair of glasses perched low on his nose. Mrs. Mercer, he greeted, shaking my hand firmly. Why don't you tell me what's been going on? I told him everything. The receipts, the withdrawals at dawn, Kara's sudden concern about my memory. He listened without interrupting, his pen moving slowly across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, my throat tight and my palms damp, he leaned back and studied me. You're not confused, Mrs. Mercer, he said evenly. You're being pressured. What you need is structure boundaries set on paper, not just in your mind. Together, we drafted what he called a boundary plan. My secondary cards would be frozen immediately. Any requests for money had to be in writing, accompanied by receipts and proof of need. All withdrawals would go through me alone, with alerts sent directly to my phone. He slid the draft across the desk. Neat black type, spelling out protections that felt both stern and merciful. Sign this, and we'll send copies to your bank, he said. You'll have legal backing if anyone contests it. I stared at the lines, at the clarity of rules I should have written years ago. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen, but when the ink touched paper, something inside me steadied. Walking out of that office with the document folded in my purse, I felt taller, as if my spine had remembered how to carry itself, for the first time in months, maybe years. I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. It was a Saturday afternoon when the knock came, too sharp, too insistent. I opened the door to find Kara on the porch, flanked by two women I barely knew her co-workers. I guessed, both wearing sympathetic smiles that felt rehearsed. Mom, Kara began, her voice carrying the weight of false concern. We're here because we love you. We think you're struggling, and we can't ignore it anymore. They filed into my living room as if it belonged to them, settling on the sofa while I remained by the window. One of the women, a brunette with heavy perfume, leaned forward. Evaden, Kara told us you've been confused about money. We've seen this with our own parents. It's nothing to be ashamed of. My daughter nodded solemnly, as though she were leading an intervention for someone caught in a spiral. The word ashamed curled in the air like smoke. I set my folder on the coffee table with a soft thud. Then, let's not rely on memory, I said evenly. I opened the folder and spread out the ledger I had kept, each entry highlighted in yellow or pink. Alongside, I placed the bank alerts printed from my phone, time-stamped, undeniable. I pointed to a withdrawal logged at 3 a.m. This, Kara, happened while I was asleep. You said we'd spoken about it. Here is my phone record from that night. No calls, no texts. Explain that to me. Her friends shifted uncomfortably. One tried to speak, but faltered when I slid the page closer. And here, 2 purchases logged in different towns, at the exact same hour. Did you drive faster than the speed of light? Kara. The room fell quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Kara's jaw tightened, but her allies avoided my eyes. Their certainty drained out with the silence, leaving only the rustle of paper. I gathered the pages back into the folder, my hand steady. The balance had shifted, not with shouting, but with simple, stubborn truth, for the first time in months. Kara looked smaller than her accusations, and I no longer felt the need to defend myself. The mediation was held in a narrow office downtown, the kind with humming fluorescent lights and chairs too stiff to invite comfort. across the table. Kara sat with her arms folded, her jaw set tight. Beside her, a mediator named Mrs. Franklin arranged papers in tidy stacks, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't about blame," Mrs. Franklin began. "It's about clarity and future boundaries." I slid my folder forward. The same ledger and bank alerts I had shown before. Kara didn't look at them, but her silence was less defiant now, more wary. Mrs. Franklin outlined the terms slowly, giving each sentence space to land. First, Kara will begin repaying part of the unauthorized spending. A schedule has been drafted, manageable amounts, but steady. Second, she will attend credit counseling sessions to address financial habits. Third, any request for money from this point on must be submitted in writing, through email, with receipts attached. No exceptions. Kara let out a sharp laugh. "So I'm supposed to beg like a stranger?" I met her eyes. "You're supposed to respect boundaries. This isn't punishment, Kara. It's survival. I won't let myself be stripped of what I've worked for a moment." Her face softened. A flicker of the girl who once clutched my hand on her first day of school. Then she pushed back her chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "Fine. If this is what you want." She signed the papers with a quick, angry stroke. As if carving the page itself, the session ended quietly. Mrs. Franklin gathered the documents, her expression professional but kind. "These measures protect everyone," she said. Kara stood abruptly and headed for the door, muttering something under her breath. The slam never came, though the door closed with a controlled click. Almost careful, I remained seated for a moment longer, letting the silence settle. This wasn't victory. It was a line drawn, clear and unshakable. She could rage, resist, or comply, but the terms were set. And perhaps, beneath the storm, a seed had been planted. 6 months passed, and the house grew quiet again, not the tense quiet of suspicion, but the kind that settles like sunlight on the floorboards. My finances were steady, my accounts secure. The folder of ledgers was tucked away in a drawer, not forgotten, but no longer needed every day. Life had taken on a gentler rhythm. I joined the staff at the Asheville Library for a weekly program, teaching seniors how to recognize signs of financial abuse. At first, only 3 people showed up: an older man with a cane, a widow in a blue shawl, and a woman who confessed she had loaned her nephew thousands without a single receipt. By the 3rd month, the room filled with folding chairs, each story echoing my own in some way. Sharing what I'd learned wasn't just practical, it was healing. The trust Ms. Patel helped me establish was more than a safeguard. Now it was a gift. Instead of funneling money into Kara's unchecked spending, I directed funds into a small education account for my grandchildren. Tuition, books, activities, it would be there for them when they needed it. Quietly, carefully, I chose to support their futures without feeding old patterns. I still saw them from time to time, usually on weekends when Kara's temper cooled enough to allow a visit. They came running up the walkway with drawings and questions, their innocence untouched by the tension between their mother and me. With them, there was no ledger, no password, only hugs and laughter that made the house feel alive again. On warm evenings, I returned to the garden. The begonias were thriving, red blooms spilling across the patio. I bent to water them, listening to the silence of my phone on the porch table. No missed calls, no urgent demands, just peace. I set the watering can down and brushed soil from my palms, the air fragrant with blossoms. In that stillness, I found the words that had carried me through it. All love is welcome here. Control is not.